Stephen King so eloquently titled a short story from his 1978 collection Night Shift, "Sometimes they come back, years later, having experienced any number of things there in the darkness." The sharp-eyed amongst you will recognize this as a Hensel. I know, it's been a while. I think we saw this one about 4 years ago. It's the only all-mahogany and only sunburst example I've come across in the flesh. Well, apparently it was taken home and left out on display in a condition of dryness, and some cracks have developed in the soundboard. Someone else saw it and rescued it and wants to put even more money into it. Beyond the cracks, the main thing the new owner wants is frets. Different ones. I've always mentioned this about the Hensels. They're tiny and annoying. And he also wants a truss rod, because this neck does have a little bit more relief in it than we'd like. So we're going to do a rather major alteration and take the fretboard off to access the neck proper. And we're going to add a little bit of radius to the fretboard while we're at it to make it easier to play. People will occasionally ask about adding a truss rod to their ancient parlor guitar, or suggest that others do it, as kind of a flippant sort of comment. I think that it's important to point out that this is not a quick, easy, and inexpensive prospect. It's sort of demanding, technically. It's not something we enter into lightly. Looking at this thing, I'm quite pleased to see the setup has held very firmly. It's doing well for itself. It's still got the same technical dimensions as it did when it left the shop here. Bridge is still firmly in place. I'm quite fond of the work we did on that. Going to remove the nut. Taking the fretboard off is going to start off looking very similar to the way I do when I'm loosening the fretboard extension for a neck reset. Got my little sealing iron here. I'm not taking the frets out of the board at this point because I don't want to really sit the iron directly on it if I don't have to. The fret wire conducts the heat into the rosewood pretty well. The other thing, of course, is to be mindful because we've got 80-plus-year-old celluloid binding on this thing, and that stuff does not like heat, and in some cases can catch on fire. So care must be taken. So I'm going to start off on this end, then I'm going to switch to the nut end and work backwards. Sometimes there are grain issues. Hopefully the hide glue is desiccated enough at this point that it's just going to go pop. This has been soaking up the heat for 20 minutes or so. And see, I want to protect this chippy old finish, so I got a piece of plastic here. Actually, I want to remove a couple of frets because I want to put a couple of locating pins through the fretboard that will make repositioning it easier when the time comes. So I'll take out a couple of these now and drill some tiny little holes. This fret wire really is minuscule. It is less than 50 thousandths wide. A 1/16 of an inch. Don't go all the way through the neck. That would be annoying. But I do want to be down in the mahogany. I'll start working on the other end of the board. And again, I've got the temperature on this at 138 degrees Celsius, 280 degrees Fahrenheit. I wouldn't want to go too much hotter than that, and in fact we could probably turn it down a little into the 250 range because we are dealing with this old plastic. The nut end wasn't opening up well, so I'm going back to the body side. Sometimes it helps to overlap the blades like this. It creates a wedging effect, and it also keeps them warm, and it transfers the heat into the neck proper. This is taking far too long, and the smell I'm smelling does not smell like hide glue. There's a chemical component to it, but it is not crispy like hide glue. I'm having to cut through it, and it's taking forever. Yeah, I'm smelling, it's like formaldehyde or formalin. This is not straight hide glue. I want to keep checking the joint between the binding and the neck, just to make sure that the blade isn't trying to dive down into a piece of grain that wants to go in the opposite direction. I determined that it really wanted to release from one side, so I worked the entire length of the board, and then I turned around and came back the other way, with the suspicion that, you know, usually if something wants to chip out in one direction, it won't the other, so it's all about reading the grain. There we go. This great big steel bar down the center of this neck. Well, it's not really centered, but it's in there. And of course we lost some areas of rosewood, which I'll try and pick off and glue to the bottom of the board. Knowing as we do now that this was put together with resorcinol formaldehyde resin, it's kind of a miracle that it came apart, even with an hour's hard work, because that stuff was formulated for airplane frames and marine applications during wartime. It's exceptionally strong, waterproof, UV-proof, and designed to survive massive temperature fluctuations, right? You couldn't pick a worse adhesive to try and pull apart. Why don't we use it for everything on guitars? Well, formaldehyde, for one thing, is not great for the body. It'll start embalming you before you're ready, and it's tricky to work with. It's also pretty dark in color. Other glues are easier. I can put these original parts back together and have a working guitar neck, and that might be what happens. It might not get the truss rod. It would be really nice if this was a straight metal bar, but I believe it's actually a chunk of 1/2-inch angle iron. So the other half of the L shape is vertical in a channel, probably glued in with the same adhesive. Why is it off center like this? Did they want to stiffen the treble side more, maybe? Like leaving it floppier on the bass side could add more relief for those strings? I don't know. I think it's more likely that the vertical arm is on center, and this is just where the other side ended up. Now that makes sense. How did the neck bow with this much steel in it? The neck previously had 25 thousandths relief. Maybe it was always there, but it's also amazing how wood can compress around an obstacle. Like, if you constrain one side, it'll move on the other. So, I'll make an attempt, but like, trying to heat this up might be futile. Like, the wood will char before the glue gives way. And if I do manage to get it out, I'm going to be routing a big channel to inlay a square of new wood and then cut grooves in that for the rod and a couple of carbon fiber strips. I'm trying to be optimistic, but I have doubts, right? This is why you folks tune in. You're discovering this all with me as it happens. And I did not anticipate this. You can see what I'm facing here. This much material is down inside that channel with a bunch of glue. See, if this was hide glue, it would just crack as soon as I did that. Ho ho ho! Ha 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 ha! Yes. Well, isn't that amazing? I speculate the development of a layer of rust between the steel and the glue created the weak point. Oh, one more thing about that glue. As I said, that was developed during World War II. I think it was 1942, 1943, so that almost certainly makes this a post-war guitar. Probably late 40s. R.S. Williams, the company for which this was made, went out of business, I think, in 1951. So, yeah, this is a late 40s guitar. Okay, so we got a lot of darkened wood down there. And it's going to kill my router bit, for certain. But I'm going to call it quits for the day and go to sleep happy. Got to build a routing template. Use a cabinet scraper to crack off the old glue. Then a short sanding beam. I got lucky and ended up using just the tiniest amount of exposed router bearing, just enough to guide the cut. I introduced the 1/2-inch radius to the corners of the plug. I planed its width so that it fit perfectly and then reduced most of the excess height so that there's not a whole lot to plane when it's installed in the guitar. So that went in there very smoothly, a good snug fit. And I clamped it up with surgical tubing. Planing, planing, planing. Now I have to excavate for a couple of strips of carbon fiber, so I'll tape my jig directly to the board and route those out in multiple passes. Then I'll route another groove for my truss rod of choice. This is a low-profile double-action rod from Stuart McDonald. They work well. I'm going to be inlaying this fairly deep and adding a strip of wood over top of it because I think they work better that way. I think they're more sensitive and it gives me more clearance inside the body for adjustment. So finally everything is in place. The carbon fiber is glued in with epoxy. Just need to do a little light surface sanding for the cleanup. I'll use a cabinet scraper to clean up the gluing surface of the board. I also re-inlaid some of the missing material that had been left behind on the neck during the removal process. Here's where the previously drilled positioning holes come into play. I'll slip a couple of 1/16 of an inch drill bits in there. I'll strap it all up with the surgical tubing again. Last night as I was gluing the fretboard on, I got to looking at these side dot markers and saying, what the heck's going on there? I don't think I put those in, did I? No, of course not, because these are 3/32 of an inch, great big Gibson style dots, and I would have used 1/16 of an inch. And I certainly wouldn't have used a single dot on the 12th fret, and the placement is a bit shaky. They start off okay, but as we get closer to the body joint, these ones here are much closer to the top edge of the binding, which got me worried, because if I want to sand a 16-inch radius into this board, well, if you're over 2 inches in width, you end up losing about a millimeter's worth of height. And yes, it would be sanding into those black dots, which looks bad, especially from the front, because you'll see, you know, the black lines over those areas. So, annoying as it is, I think I have to drill these things out, fill them, and then reposition closer to the neck. Which is not what I want to do, but which is what I have to do, so let's do the darn thing. I drilled out the old dots, and then repositioned to drill the new ones, slightly lower. I melted some white celluloid binding in some acetone and used that as the adhesive. It'll also act as a gap filler. There's also a little chip here at the end of the fretboard. I'll glue up the cracks at the end of the body. Squeeze some glue in there, pump it in with my little suction cup, clean it off, and put some magnets in place to hold it together. The last time I looked at this guitar, it had a bunch of loose brace ends. I also ended up adding a couple of braces, sound hole reinforcement braces on either side of the hole. This is ladder braced, by the way. It's not X braced. And of course this time every brace end that wasn't loose before is now. They all popped free. So I'm going back and gluing all the other ones. And to be honest, I kind of want to add some more reinforcement in the upper bout area here. This guitar is made without a popsicle brace, which is the one that goes between the upper transverse brace and the end block. There's nothing there. It's a pretty thin mahogany top and it dives quite a lot under string tension. The problem is, of course, with the truss rod now, I gotta check and see whether there's enough space for me to do that. Maybe just enough if I thin it out a bit in the center. Yeah, I think I'll make it work. The brace is about 2.5 millimeters thick, and I sanded with some paper on a dowel to give me this little relief cut. And that's where it'll live. I whipped up a couple of cross-grain cleats for some cleatage, and I pared back the accumulated gunk from the side dot markers, glued the fingerboard extension back down, and then we're going to get into fretting. I won't belabor the point too much. I'll heat them up with my little soldering iron here and pop them out with my little fret removal pliers. The truss rod is adjusted so there's a little bit of tension on it, and yeah, this board needs a lot of sanding. Using the 16-inch radius sanding block, I'll make the surface curved. The fret slots are extremely narrow at about 19 thousandths. I need to open that up. I've got a 0.6 millimeter rotary cutter. It's like an end mill in my Dremel here. And the thing is set at its top speed, which is still not really quite fast enough, but it gets the job done. I'll cut those slots a little bit wider. And yes, every once in a while, there's a casualty. They're usually not too difficult to remove. It's kind of a ridiculous operation. This is helpful. I take a piece of tape and fashion a little flag that becomes a propeller that blows the dust away. Then I adjust the depth of cut so that it's just deeper than the fret tang. After cutting the frets to length, I have to notch them because this is a bound fretboard. I'll start the frets with a hammer, give it a squeeze with a press, clean up, clip, bevel the ends, knock off the corners, recrown them. Adding a radius to the fretboard means the nut slots will need to be adjusted. With strings on, I find that the relief is about 12 thousandths. Alright, another Hensel in the books, or rather the same Hensel in the book again. I just adjusted the truss rod, which is very nice to be able to do. I have a relief in the neck of about 6 thousandths rather than 20 plus, and nice comfortable frets to play. So, I guess I can make noise again. Have I mentioned enough that these things are not like hidden gem Martins? They're just not, I'm sorry. They can be made to play, but you're going to pay an arm and a leg to do it.